So we're going to kind of go over the timeline of marijuana legislation in the U.S.
So the first kind of appearance of marijuana in kind of being sold over the market, over the counter, medically was post Civil War, where marijuana was first sold in many over the counter medicinal products. But as time went on, the the food, the Pure Food and Drug Act made it so that if marijuana was in the product, it required a label saying that it was. So that was just kind of the first appearance of marijuana in kind of the United States. But as time went on, it started to obtain a negative negative light, negative stigma, as in the Great Depression when lots of Mexican immigrants came over and took American jobs, they were strongly associated with marijuana, and that contributed to the kind of bad stigma around marijuana. And this kind of just continued from the 1920s into the 1930s, where in 1931, the list of states outlawing marijuana rose to 29. And it's just kind of all about this negative stigma about marijuana in the early 20th century. Um, as time went on, the a movie came out called Reefer Madness that basically was a propaganda film to try and stop upper middle class white Americans from trying the drug, where basically listed a bunch of, or it showed a bunch of things that basically marijuana made you go crazy. And this was basically to deter just people from using it. Um,
Then came the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, and this prohibited the use of marijuana on the federal level. But the problem with this tax is that on the state level, it was not illegal. So if you were to report yourself possessing marijuana to pay the tax, it would actually be self incriminating. So this created a huge problem for states and eventually led them to kind of outlaw and prohibit marijuana as well.
so moving into the 1950s, 1960s, there was a study that was done that surveyed a bunch of people, a bunch of Americans, and it came out that 4 in 100 Americans had smoked marijuana in the past year. So this just further shows the sentiment around marijuana at the time.
And as acceptance started to grow into the 70s, as middle class whites started to use marijuana recreationally, it came the Controlled Substances Act, as well as Nixon, who makes it kind of the priority of his presidentialship to declare war on drugs and invest millions of dollars in fighting kind of this growth of middle class use of drugs.
So on the backs of kind of the hippie movement with marijuana, the first magazine issue of the High Times came out in February 1974. And this is the cover right here. But as you can see, the tides were changing as marijuana acceptance was growing. It's During this time, Oregon also decriminalized marijuana, and they became the first state to do so. Um,
So then comes Reagan's administration, and with that, he kind of furthers Nixon's mission to get tough on drugs and particularly marijuana, and kind of declares this war on marijuana use.
along with other drugs. Moving forward, the Anti-Drug Abuse Act was created under Reagan, and it just basically established kind of re- longer mandatory sentences relative to what had been going on at the time. And it just basically the federal government cracking down. On top of that, Nancy Reagan, Ronald's wife, created the Just Say No campaign to spread awareness and basically try and stop youth from even trying marijuana and other drugs. So in 1996, California became the first state to legalize medical marijuana, and the first ever marijuana dispensary called the Marin Alliance for medical marijuana was created in Fairfax, California.
And then kind of after that, it created this chain reactions of Alaska, Oregon, Washington, Maine, and further with Colorado, Hawaii, and Nevada kind of legalizing marijuana for medicinal purposes. And this was due to the fact that a lot of studies were coming out on the benefits of marijuana, particularly in regards to pain management. One study found that the use of marijuana can actually help stop epileptic seizures. So a bunch of these studies coming out kind of facilitated more and more states to kind of legalize it for the use of doctors to prescribe to their patients.
Yeah, then in 2010, surveys showed that a majority of Americans supported marijuana legalization, recreational marijuana legalization, and this was a big step because it had never gotten to this point before. Then in 2012, Washington and Colorado became the first states to legalize recreational marijuana retail and use. But their stores didn't open and go into effect until 2014. But this was a big step. And just to compare with the 1964 study that showed 4 in 100 Americans had smoked marijuana in the past year, study done in 2013 showed that 1 in 4 American people had smoked marijuana in the past year. And this was on the back of an increased nationwide support for legal or recreational legalization. And then just moving forward, there was more medicinal marijuana legalization in states, and the DEA was the House of Representatives passed a bill prohibiting the DEA from using their funds to arrest medical marijuana patients.
And then finally, in January of 2015, President Obama declares his support for the decriminalization of marijuana. And this was due to the fact that he was trying to further a reduction in our prison populations.
So in 2015, Washington, D.C., Alaska, and Oregon became the next couple states and territories to legalize recreational marijuana retail and use. We pulled up a short video here that depicts 6 months in Colorado's recreational marijuana legalization experiment, and it kind of gives a live look into the problems and the
Searching
solutions
for a hotel online is pretty much like
they are
this.
dealing with.
Some deals fly right past you, and you'll never see them again. And some
Sorry
just
for the
don't
ad.
fit. With Trivago, you're in charge. Simply choose what's important to you and find what you want. Trivago makes sure you see the deals you care about, so you can find your ideal hotel for the best price. Hotel Trivago.
And we now turn to Washington State, which on Tuesday will become the second state to allow the legal sale of recreational marijuana. Washington follows Colorado, which is 6 months into its own marijuana experiment. ABC's Clayton Sandell now on the law's impact so far in the mile-high city of Denver.
Have your IDs ready!
Depending on who you ask,
We think the whole world's watching right now.
Colorado's legal marijuana experiment was either going to bring a harmless new gold rush or plunge the state into reefer madness.
Under the influence of the drug, he killed his entire family with an axe.
$9.07.
6 months since the first ever recreational pot shops opened here, Colorado is finding out what's working and trying to fix what isn't.
$60.
So far this year, recreational marijuana dealers have raked in nearly $70 million, giving the state $11 million in new tax revenue. Tourism isn't suffering either.
The government still makes a lot of money off of arresting people for this where I live.
Half of Linda Andrews' customers come from out of state.
So we're constantly seeing people that are so excited just to be here because they come from some place that it doesn't exist.
But with the good comes the bad.
Police found a receipt inside the home for pot purchased just 3 hours before the shooting.
2 deaths, including one alleged murder, have been linked to overdoses of edible marijuana mixed into cookies and candy, prompting new, stricter labels and packaging.
Very good.
Dr. Sam Wang says last year, 8 kids showed up at the Children's Hospital emergency room with marijuana poisoning. This year, already a dozen.
When the people decided they wanted to decriminalize marijuana, I think one of the things that people didn't entirely think about was kind of some of these public health concerns.
Then there are the banks. Businesses can't open accounts because the federal government still considers pot illegal.
So while we are legal, we don't always feel entirely legal.
Heavily armed private security firms are thriving.
We look for anything suspicious.
Hired to move piles of cash from stores to secret vaults.
We don't like to say how much our clients have in their store.
Pot advocates who argue weed is less harmful than alcohol point out overall crime is down, though any connection to marijuana is hazy.
The system of regulation is actually safer for the public than an unregulated black market.
They've been closely watching in Washington State, where recreational stores open this week.
There you go, brother. Thank you.
Hoping to avoid the growing pains felt in Colorado, ganja's ground zero. For this week, Clayton Sandell, ABC News, Denver.
So we hope that gave you a little perspective on what's going on currently and in the past with marijuana legalization. And we'll include the link to this timeline below.